Hi friends, welcome back for quiz number 4 in the Microsoft AZ-500 practice exam series. Now, if you're this far along, I'm hoping you're feeling ready for the exam. I do want to make sure that you've seen 2 other videos. So I have a video with some preparation tips and some free resources for getting yourself ready for AZ-500. So if you've not seen that, go find it on my channel. And maybe more importantly is the AZ-500 exam cram series, which is about an hour and 15 minutes that really gives you some focus to aid in your prep. This is a great first hour or last hour for your preparation. So if you haven't seen both of those, go watch them now and come back here. And hopefully you're feeling pretty close to ready at this point, but let's get into quiz number 4 and find out. So a quick refresher on how it works. So as with the first 3 installments, we have here 30 questions. I'm going to narrate these for you so you can listen anywhere. And we have questions across all 4 AZ-500 exam domains. And we have some questions in here that are a direct response to some of your questions you brought to me in the comments and over on LinkedIn. And these are complete with explanations, really just giving you another way to consume practice quizzes. And if you like this format, definitely subscribe, hit the bell, give us a like, and tell your friends. Telling your friends about this video is the best thing you can do to help our channel and our efforts in building this free content. All right, let's get to it. So question number 1. So what is the format of an OpenID Connect token? Choose one. So is it JSON? Is it XML? JWT or SAML. So acronyms that you should probably be familiar with in the world of identity. Easily Googleable, if that's a verb, if not. So what is the format of an OpenID Connect token? And the answer is JWT. So in the OpenID Connect flow, the token is a JSON web token format, and it's used by the client to authenticate the user. Question number 2. What is the minimum required license to enable Azure AD conditional access for a user? And you might ask yourself, why are you seeing license questions for a technical exam? It's because sometimes licensing will come up as an element in scenario questions. Heard this repeatedly from other folks as well out in the public space. So our options here: Azure AD Premium Plan 2, Microsoft 365 Business, Microsoft 365 E3, or Azure AD Premium Plan 1. So which of these gets you the full functionality of Azure AD conditional access? So that baseline functionality comes in option 4, which is Azure AD Premium Plan 1. That's your minimum licensing. Now, when you go to Plan 2, there are a couple of important features that pop in. So with Azure AD Premium Plan 2, you get access to privileged identity management, and you get access to identity protection, which brings an element of risk to your conditional access scenarios. We can evaluate risk in real time. So remember, Azure AD Premium Plan 1 is kind of your baseline for conditional access. You've got PIM and identity protection coming in Plan 2, just in case it pops up on the exam. Number 3, in privileged identity management in Azure AD, what are the available settings when an assigned reviewer does not complete the review before the review ends? So in other words, when we have a self-review, what are the options that we can implement if the user fails to respond? So I want you to pick all that apply. So no change, remove access, approve access, or disable account. So if a user fails to respond to a self-review in PIM, what are the options in terms of how we handle their role eligibility? So if they don't tell us if they still need access to the role, what can we do? Now, the option here is 1, no change, 2, remove access, and 3, approve access. And there's actually a 4th option that wasn't mentioned in the potential answers there, and that's take recommendations, in which the system will tell us what is recommended based on activity of that user and that role over the period. Question 4. when multiple Azure Active Directory conditional access policies apply to a user, which of the following are true? Choose all that apply. Policies are not applied in a particular order. Block access takes priority over all other settings. Policies are applied in order by created date, or policies with device settings take precedence. So when multiple Azure AD conditional access policies apply to a user, which of the following are true? This comes directly from a user question post-exam. And the answer here are options 1 and 2. So the policies are essentially not applied in any particular order. It's more of a merge. All of the policies and all the requirements have to be met before granting access to the user. So it's going to evaluate all the policies, and block access takes priority over all your other settings there. So the blocks take priority over the allows. Probably no surprise to you there. Question 5. When configuring an app registration in Azure AD, where do you configure the services the application can access? Is it in the manifest blade, the authentication blade, the API permissions blade, or roles and administrator? So where do we configure the services the application can access? So this is really just testing that you've actually walked through an app registration and configured one, something you definitely want to do before the exam. Hands-on is so important in AZ-500 because it's deeply technical. And our answer here is 3, API permissions. So you use that add a permission button in the API permissions blade for setting those permissions. Question number 6. This is a fill in the blank. Blank and blank are required for access for an application that has been registered with Azure AD for modern user authentication. Is it tenant ID and client ID? Is it the client ID and the client secret? The client ID and redirect URL? Or the tenant ID and the client secret? So the tenant ID being your Azure AD tenant, the client ID being from your registration. So make sure you know what all these terms are. If you're not familiar with any of these, you need to go back and touch app registration before you hit the exam. And our answer here is 2, client ID and client secret. So think of the client ID and the client secret as a user and a password. When you set up that app registration, you're establishing a trust essentially for that app and your tenant. But the client ID and the client secret are your user and password. The redirect URI is a question I get a lot, and that's the location the authorization server, which is the Microsoft Identity Platform in this case, will send the user once the app has been successfully authorized and granted a code or a token. Question number 7. You need to delegate access to an admin for a VM named VM1 in the Contoso VM resource group. They should have full control over the VM, but they should not be able to grant access to other users. And I want you to assume that there might be multiple VMs in this resource group. So what permissions are you going to assign? And remember, when we're assigning permissions, we have the security principal, we have the role and the scope. So in this case is option 1, scope of Contoso VM resource group and role owner. 2, set our scope to the Contoso VM resource group and role of contributor. Is our scope VM1 and the role owner? Or do we scope it to VM1 to that virtual machine and a role of contributor? And a hint here, remember, when you get questions related to RBAC, to role-based access control, you're always thinking about least privilege on the exam. You might see multiple answers that will work. You want to pick the best answer that offers least privilege. And in this case, that's going to be option 4, which is a scope of VM1. We're assigning down to the VM and the role of contributor. So the contributor role grants access all rights except the ability to grant rights to other users. And scoping to the VM object ensures permissions are not granted to other VMs in the resource group. So we're establishing least privilege in that case. So the reader role, contributor role, and administrator role you'll see across multiple native roles in Azure RBAC. So you want to be familiar with those. But contributor in particular across Azure roles grants access to all rights except the ability to grant access to others. So park that in the back of your head when you're thinking about the contributor role in any form. Question 8. Which of the following roles can manage assignments for other administrators in privileged identity management for Azure AD roles? There are going to be two answers here, and I have a special wrinkle here I'm going to explain to you after the fact. So, which roles? Global Administrator, 2. Security Administrator, 3. Security Reader, 4. Privileged Role Administrator. So which of these roles can manage assignments for other admins in the PIM feature for Azure AD roles? I want you to pick 2, and I'm going to explain how it works so you'll remember for the exam, because this could be important. And our answer here is Global Administrator, which I bet you guessed, and Privileged Role Administrator. Now that Global Administrator, the first Global Administrator who enables the Privileged Identity Management role feature for an organization, they automatically get role assignments and access to PIM. And then they can assign others to the Privileged Role Administrator role, allowing others to then configure the PIM feature. So that's important. The Global Administrator who enables PIM automatically gets access, and then they delegate. Question 9. Which of the following roles are required to manage assignments for other administrators in PIM for Azure resource roles? Is it Subscription Administrator, Resource Administrator, Privileged Role Administrator, or Security Administrator? So which of these is the role required for managing assignments in PIM for Azure resource roles? Time's almost up. And the answer here is Resource Administrator. So a user can't manage privileged identity management for resources without Resource Administrator permissions. And where I'm talking about specifically, if I go to the Privileged Identity Management blade here in the Azure portal, down here under Manage, I'm talking about Azure Resources, where I can now find and discover resources that I would like to control under PIM. So make sure you put your hands on PIM, you put your hands on the access reviews, and both Azure AD roles and managing those resource roles as well. Question 10. The following security principles may be granted rights to a resource group: a service principal, a managed identity, an Azure AD user, or all of the above. So which of these security principles may be granted rights to a resource group? So a security principal is an entity to which we can assign permissions. And the answer here is all of the above. So service principals, managed identities, and Azure AD users are all security principles. We can grant them all access to resources. Question 11. What are the options for configuring a custom RBAC role in Azure AD? I want you to choose the best answer here. Can we use PowerShell? Can we configure custom roles in the Azure portal? What about the REST API? Or are all three of these a possibility? Which of these options can we use to configure a custom RBAC role in Azure AD? Sometimes you'll have a feature that's only accessible via PowerShell or only via the Azure portal, or maybe only programmatically via the REST API. So where can we configure a custom RBAC role? If you've configured one, you'll know the answer is all of the above. So 4. So custom RBAC roles can be configured both in the portal, in the UI, or programmatically. So make sure you put your hands on custom roles. I expect that well could come up. That's a more recent feature. Question 12. You need to ensure that all of your Azure VMs have a consistent operating system configuration at deploy time. which of the following options would you configure? I think this is going to be a tricky one for you. ARM templates, desired state configuration, application security groups, or device configuration policy. So you need to ensure that all your Azure VMs have a consistent operating system configuration at deploy time. Which of the following options would you configure? So we're getting down to a pretty granular level of control here. You know, our visibility we need is pretty low at an OS settings level. And the answer here is desired state configuration. So DSC enables policy-based configuration of the OS, and it's used by management features like Azure Update Management. When it comes down to policy-based administration on the AZ-500 exam, you're going to find often that the answer is Azure Policy. Azure Security Center factors into that. But be familiar with desired state configuration and where it factors in, because you could well see this as a distractor on a question, but there's no guarantee you won't see this as an answer on a question, because those skills measured are not exhaustive. Always remember that. They can get you on any facet of that. Question 13. You're configuring an Azure firewall instance, and you want to ensure that all traffic from an Azure subnet going to www.kinetico.com is routed through the Azure firewall. Which option should you implement? Is it a network rule, a route table, an application rule, or a network security group? So you're configuring an Azure firewall instance, and you need to route traffic going to a particular FQDN through an Azure firewall. So which of these are we going to implement? And our answer is 3, application rules. So you can configure application rules that define fully qualified domain names, or FQDNs, that can be accessed from a subnet, and the network rules that define source address, protocol, destination port, and address. Azure Firewall is a big animal. It's very full-featured. It's a modern solution. I expect that this is something that gets attention on a Microsoft exam because it's new and full-featured and front and center in terms of security. So if you're not familiar with Azure Firewall and application rules, I've got a tutorial for you in the AZ-500 Ultimate Exam Prep Guide. So grab a copy and make sure you take a look at the walkthrough before you head into the exam. Question 14. Which of the following are advantages of Azure Bastion over traditional remote desktop access? Which of the following are advantages over traditional remote desktop? Is it that Azure Bastion manages the session in a browser? No public IP addresses are necessary. Bastion uses standard RDP ports, or it supports both Windows and Linux VMs. So which two? I want you to choose 2 answers here. Which of the 2 are key advantages of Azure Bastion over traditional remote desktop access, just traditional RDP? So the answer here are that Azure Bastion is browser-based. You go to the Azure portal, and it uses private IP addresses on your VMs, so you don't have to have your VMs published to the internet. Now, in the back end from the Bastion host, because you're connecting to a Bastion host, it's going to use RDP or SSH over to your VMs. But you, as an administrator, can basically go to the Azure portal, and you can connect to these VMs remotely using a browser, and there's no public IP address publishing necessary. So those are really key value props of Azure Bastion. Great how-to link in the AZ-500 Ultimate Exam Prep Guide. Question 15. In Azure Sentinel, blank are groups of related blank that together create an actionable potential threat that you can investigate and resolve. So we're filling in the blank to test your knowledge of concepts here. So in Azure Sentinel, are alerts groups of related incidents? Are incidents groups of related events? Are events groups of related alerts? Or are incidents groups of related alerts? So in Azure Sentinel, blank are groups of related blank that together create an actionable potential threat that you can investigate and resolve. I know this is a tricky one. Azure Sentinel came onto the exam first in July of 2020, if memory serves. So you can expect that the big shiny new features are going to get some attention. I wanted to make sure you took a look at this. The answer here is that incidents are groups of related alerts that together create an actionable potential threat that you can investigate and resolve. So Azure Sentinel uses analytics and machine learning rules that can take those low fidelity alerts and turn them into high fidelity incidents. So giving us higher certainty that there's something we need to deal with. So be very familiar with incidents versus alerts when you walk into the exam when it comes to Azure Sentinel. Question 16. So we're in domain 3 at this point. We're in managed security operations. So Azure policy allows the assignment of a policy to a management group. What level of scope is affected by a policy targeted to a management group? Is it all Azure subscriptions? All resource groups in a subscription? 3, all subscriptions in the management group? Or 4, resource groups in the management groups? So Azure policy allows the assignment of a policy to a management group. What level of scope is affected by a policy targeted to a management group? And the answer is 3, all subscriptions that are in the management group. So management group is a level of scope that came along later in the game with Azure, and that management group facilitates targeting policy to multiple subscriptions of our choosing at once. If we wanted to target all subscriptions in the tenant, we could actually target the root group, which is created automatically. The root group is a management group that's there by default. It targets all subs. But if we create our own management group, we can target a subset of subscriptions in our management group. 17. When creating alert rules in Azure Monitor for events in the Azure Activity Log, what must you configure to notify users when an alert is triggered? So we're down in security operations. We're testing your knowledge here of alerting functionality in Azure Monitor. So option 1, do we need to configure a resource? Do we need to configure 2, an action group? Or is it 3, target criteria? Or 4, alert logic? So I want you to choose the best, most complete answer here. When you're creating alert rules in Azure Monitor for events in the Azure Activity Log, what must you configure to notify users when an alert is triggered? And the answer here is 2, action group. So an action group is a collection of notification preferences that are defined by the owner of the subscription. And Azure Monitor and Service Health alerts use action groups to notify users that an alert has been triggered. So that action group is key for notification. Question 18. An Azure Bastion host provides blank and blank connectivity to workloads sitting behind the Bastion host. So choose 1. So the Bastion host, Azure Bastion provides SSH and HTTPS connectivity, or is it 2, HTTPS and RDP connectivity, or is it 3, SSH and RDP connectivity, or 4, does Azure Bastion provide RDP and HTTP connectivity? So we're connecting to Azure Bastion in the Azure portal over 443. And Azure Bastion is providing which 2 types of connectivity to backend workloads? So the answer here is 3, SSH and RDP. So when you connect to the Bastion host, you're connecting on 443 from the Azure portal, but the Bastion host itself provides RDP to your Windows systems and SSH to your Linux VMs. And question 19. The just-in-time VM access feature and Azure Bastion are designed to work together. True or false? This came straight from the public space, where a tester mentioned that after the fact, they had seen a question on JIT VM access, and Azure Bastion. This is straight off of LinkedIn. I thought this was an interesting one, and you should probably know. So the answer here is false. So the just-in-time VM access feature provides a gated solution for RDP and SSH to public IPs. That's how we can request access, and our network security group is temporarily reconfigured to allow RDP or SSH to happen for the period of time requested. Azure Bastion provides remote access via a browser and the Azure portal using the VM's private IP address. You'll actually see a request out on user voice to make these features work well together, but today they have not been designed to work hand in hand. Question 20. Playbooks in Azure Sentinel use a special blank to instantiate an automated response using an Azure Logic app. So is it 1, a special action, 2, a special trigger, 3, a special condition, or 4, a special connector? So playbooks in Azure Sentinel use a special blank to instantiate. So instantiate means start, and an automated response using an Azure Logic app. And the answer here is a special trigger. So security playbooks are Azure Logic apps that use triggers designed for Azure Sentinel. There are 2 at this time. There may be more in the future. For the exam, you want to be familiar with Logic apps in terms of not only triggers, but actions, conditions, and connectors. Question 21, another Sentinel question. You notice that when you attempt to investigate an incident created from your custom rule in Azure Sentinel, that the investigation graph, the visual investigation interface, is empty. What is the most likely cause? Is it 1, the rule is disabled? 2, is it a permissions issue, an RBAC issue? 3, do you have a query syntax problem? Or 4, is it an entity mapping issue in your query? So you notice when you attempt to investigate an incident created from your custom rule, a rule you created from scratch in Azure Sentinel, that the graph is empty. What's the most likely cause? And the answer here is 4. It's entity mapping. So you'll only be able to investigate an incident visually if you use the entity mapping fields when you set up your analytics rule. So when you set up your rule, it's going to check your query results, etc. So the rule being disabled almost is not an option here. Permissions almost certainly not an option here. And query syntax very unlikely to be an option. Entity mapping 9 times out of 10 is what I find is the problem when folks get an empty investigation graph. So if you haven't created a custom rule in Azure Sentinel, if you're not familiar with that entity mapping interface, at least go look at one of the existing rules where you can see that the entities have been mapped. All right, question 22. You need to implement security in SQL Server to ensure database admins never see sensitive customer info, such as credit card data, in the databases they manage. Which option should you choose? 1, row-level security. 2, always encrypted. 3, transparent data encryption. Or 4, dynamic data masking. Which option should you choose to ensure that your DBAs, your database administrators, never see sensitive customer info in the databases they manage? So we're trying to sort out permissions for manager versus the owner. So the answer here is always encrypted. So always encrypted allows clients to encrypt sensitive data inside client applications and never reveal the encryption keys to the database engine. So as a result, always encrypted provides separation between the data owner and the data manager. So definitely going into this exam, be familiar with all of those SQL data protection features for Domain 4 for securing data and application. So row-level security, always encrypted, transparent data encryption, and dynamic data masking. I have a link for you to an article that explains all of these in the Ultimate AZ-500 Exam Prep Guide. All right, question 23. Which options allow configuration of key vault secrets? Choose all that apply. Can we configure Key Vault secrets via the Azure CLI? 2, Azure PowerShell. 3, the REST API. Or 4, ARM templates. So which of the options in this list allow configuration of Key Vault secrets? So I want you to choose all that apply, and I'm not going to tell you how many. Azure CLI, PowerShell, the REST API, and or ARM templates. The answer might surprise you because it's all of the above. So I bet you knew PowerShell, Azure CLI, and the REST API. Every now and again, I stumble on folks that aren't familiar that ARM templates can also be used to configure Key Vault secrets. So definitely keep that one in the back of your mind for the exam. Question 24. When securing Azure Key Vault, you need to secure 1, the Key Vault instance, and 2, the secrets hosted in the Key Vault. Which controls are used for each? Are we using RBAC for the instance and RBAC for the secrets? Or option 2, are we using role-based access control for the instance and access policies for the secrets? Or 3, are we using access policies to secure the Key Vault instance and RBAC to secure the secrets? Or 4, are we using RBAC to secure the instance and Azure Key Vault secrets to secure the other secrets in the Key Vault? So Key Vault security is going to be a fundamental topic that I think you want to be familiar with. And the answer here is that we secure the instance level, the management plane with role-based access control. We secure the contents of the Key Vault, the secrets, the passwords, the certificates. We secure those with access policies, at least today. So remember, RBAC for the management plane for the Key Vault instance and access policies for the data plane. And do make sure you touch on the access policy templates that are available in Azure Key Vault that help you configure for specific scenarios more quickly. All right, question 25. This is a tough one. Which of the following Azure tools can be used for detecting and remediating deviations from Microsoft's recommended security baseline for common workloads? I want you to choose the best answer. Is it 1, Azure Monitor? 2, desired state configuration? 3, Azure Automation? Or 4, Azure Security Center? So which of these options is best for detecting and remediating deviations from Microsoft's recommended security baseline for common workloads? So when we're working with our data and our apps, which of these is going to be best? So this is a tough one because we could potentially use any of these in some capacity for identifying and remediating. So the right answer here is Azure Security Center. So this functionality is actually built into Security Center, even in the free tier in the Resource Security Hygiene section. So Microsoft offers a step-by-step tutorial on how you can do this. And in Resource Security Hygiene, you'll see deviations from best practices for common workloads like Azure SQL, Azure App Service, Azure Storage, Azure Network, and your Azure VMs. So that's baked in. So that's the best answer because that is the most highly functional and automated and already built for you answer. All right, question 26. Which of the Azure RBAC roles below will allow you to create custom RBAC roles in Azure? This is important. I want you to choose all that apply. Is it the contributor role, the owner role, the user access administrator role, or the security administrator role? Which of the Azure RBAC roles in this list will allow you to create custom RBAC roles in Azure? Definitely something you'll want to know for the exam. I expect you'll see quite a few questions potentially on RBAC from Domain 1, but when we're securing apps, we need to know how to create these roles. Our answer here is number 2, owner, and option 3, user access administrator. But you need explicit permissions to create custom roles, like owner or user access administrator will give you that capability. Definitely walk through the custom role tutorial and be familiar with these permissions capability. So we know in this case that contributor wasn't an option. You could just throw that out, right? Because contributor gives us all rights except the ability to grant rights to others. So you probably could have guessed that. So owner and User Access Administrator. 27. How does Azure SQL Database provide protection for data at rest? Is it 1. Dynamic data masking, 2. Azure Storage Service Encryption, 3. Always encrypted, or 4. Transparent data encryption. So these are those pesky SQL data protection options. Again, you want to be familiar with these core 4 for sure. No pun intended. And the answer here, the key there was data at rest. So the answer is transparent data encryption. So transparent data encryption performs real-time encryption and decryption of the database, the associated backups, the transaction log files at rest without requiring changes to the app. Transparent data encryption comes up a lot, and it's been around a long time actually, but it's there for Azure SQL as well. Question 28. What is the minimum Azure Active Directory built-in RBAC role required to manage Azure Key Vault? What's the minimum RBAC role required? Is it Key Vault Reader, Key Vault Contributor, Security Administrator, or Privileged Role Administrator? So we're looking for the minimum RBAC role required to manage Azure Key Vault. So remember some of those common scoping roles. So you see administrator, contributor, and reader here. And the answer is Key Vault Contributor. So remember, the contributor role gives you the ability to manage a resource, but you can't apply permissions to others. So to grant access to a user to manage Key Vault, you'd assign the predefined Key Vault Contributor role at a specific scope. 29. What is the advantage of using an app service certificate in managing TLS or SSL communication on your web app? Choose all that apply. Is it that the certificate is stored in Azure Key Vault? The certificate is issued by a trusted third-party provider. 3, the certificate is self-signed. Or 4, certificate renewal is managed by Azure. So in terms of advantages, pick one or pick all here. So what is the advantage or what are the advantages? The answer could be 1, it could be all 4, it could be somewhere in between. And the answer here is 1, it's stored in Azure Key Vault. 2, it's issued by a trusted third party like DigiCert. And 4, renewal is managed by Azure. So when you acquire certificates through that app service feature, they're stored in Key Vault, renewed automatically, and they come from a trusted provider like DigiCert. So you want to look at that managed certificate feature in Azure App Service. Significant advantages there in terms of lifecycle management of your certificates. Question 30. You are configuring security using a managed identity for your custom web app. Which option will minimize administrative effort? Is it 1, user managed identity, 2, system managed identity, 3, default managed identity, or 4, service principal with contributor rights? So you're configuring security for a managed identity for your custom web app. Which of these is going to be the least administrative effort in the long run? And the answer here is system managed identity. So the system managed identity is lower effort than the user managed because its password is maintained automatically. Typically, you can create that system managed identity by checking a box, and it's also going to be deprovisioned automatically when its associated resource is deprovisioned. On the negative side, the system managed identity can only be used with that resource to which it's associated. It can't be shared. So that's, if you needed to share a managed identity, that's where you'd use a user managed identity. But in this case, the system managed identity will be the lowest effort, and you'll find a growing list of resources that support system managed identity. And there we have it. That's it for installment 4. Remember, if you like what you're getting here, subscribe, hit the bell, give us a like, share with your friends. Good luck on the exam. Ping me with questions, and thanks for watching.